Hello, everyone. Um, our presentation is about saving the native bees. I am Rustico.
My name is Victor.
And I'm Jonathan.
So, our abstract and introduction. The general flow and overview of our presentation and paper is the importance of native bees. So, why they are important, the kind of benefits that they provide to the earth and to humanity, why the populations are at risk, so the type of challenges they face, things such as viruses and bacteria, as well as pesticides and climate change, and ways to solve these issues to help keep these important bees away from these risks and challenges. So things like research and development in pesticides or combating the effects of climate change on bees themselves.
I'm here to talk about why bees are important to the environment. Specifically, bees promote biodiversity, they support our food system, as well as the economy. Native bees are the backbone of biodiversity in our environment. They're responsible for maintaining and facilitating plant reproduction. Plant reproduction is a cycle, and it's both asexual and sexual. Bees specifically are vital to the sexual stage. They are pollinators. And according to the US Food Forest Service, pollination is the act of transferring of pollen from a male anther to a female stigma. Protecting native bee populations and their habitat ensures that our ecosystems are capable of withstanding environmental changes as well as any harmful human activity like pollution or deforestation. Uh, Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Perfect. Native bee populations are vital to our food system. They provide natural services like pollination to our agricultural crops. Over 80% of our crops are pollinated by bees. According to the USDA, honeybees are America's primary commercial pollinator, and more than over 100 US crops rely on honeybees and other pollinators. Um, Beyond crop production, bees promote genetic diversity amongst our crops. Uh, in turn, this ensures our crops are resilient to environmental changes like global warming or harmful human activity, um, or farming practices like pesticides. Without native bees, our global food system will collapse. Specifically, pollination services by native bees contribute more than $18 billion annually to the US agriculture alone. Next, there we go. They produce fruits, nuts, vegetables. Uh, Alone, honeybees products generate over $700 million annually, supporting thousands of jobs in agriculture. Protecting native bees isn't just about saving the environment, it's about ensuring economic stability. Uh, Bee populations ensure that crop prices are stable, which ensures food is on the table. Native bees are essential for sustaining biodiversity, strengthening our food system, and stabilizing our economy.
Okay, so why are our native bee populations at risk? Next slide. So first off, we're going to be talking about excessive pesticide usage. So this is specifically neonicotinoid-based pesticides. These are classified as neuroactive insecticides that target the bee's central nervous system. They're either sprayed or applied as soil drenches or seed treatments. When they're used as a seed treatment, they are expressed through the plant tissues, which includes the plant's pollen and nectar. This means that they're easily spread through the bee's nervous system when they go to pollinate the flowers. And research found by Dr. Laura Melissa Guzman, she has a PhD in zoology, and she focuses on environmental drivers within pollinator distributions across North America. And she found that the effects of this specific type of pesticide impairs navigation and reduces longevity with reductions in reproductive health, among other issues. And additional research conducted by her shows that there are already alternatives, such as crop rotation and biological control, which are effective ways to protect against pests without the overusage of pesticides. Next slide. So next up, we're going to talk about habitat loss, more specifically habitat fragmentation, climate change, and habitat destruction. So bees face issues such as shrinking migration areas, longer droughts, and just bottom line overall increase in temperatures. Most bees have adapted to colder climates, and with the rise of temperatures, they are forced to migrate to other areas that may have more competition for life, less suitable flora for them, or just straight up more dramatic ranges of temperatures that the bees are unable to adjust to. So this rise in temperature forces them to relocate and shrinks their overall habitat. And climate change doesn't not only does it make temperature trends higher, but it also creates more erratic weather patterns and temperature. So this means that summers become hotter, winters become colder. These conditions just create a harsh reality for our native bees, because when it's wintertime, bees tend to hibernate. And so when there's a flash of a high temperature, with unpredictable weather patterns, these bees tend to awaken from their hibernation preemptively. And then, since it's still winter, when the temperatures inevitably go back to freezing, the bees that left their hibernation state, they are left to paralyze and possibly just freeze out in the freezing temperatures. And this is just because when temperatures exceed about 50 degrees Fahrenheit too early in the winter, that's when bees are usually signaled to leave their hibernation, because that's usually the start of spring. And so this climate change just creates a facade where temperatures can increase massively for a short period of time and then go back. And another potential risk for the bees when they leave their hibernation too early is that the flora that they usually depend on is not available because it is still wintertime and it's not blooming at that time. So habitat loss or habitat destruction, that's also seen because of modern day just industrial agriculture. A good example of this is Iowa, and according to the Practical Farmers of Iowa, over the last 2 centuries, the state of Iowa has lost over 99% of its tall grass prairie, mostly to industrial agriculture. And this tall grass prairie is very important because it's full of wildflowers. Um, and that's what most native bees rely on. Next slide. So lastly, bees also deal with just natural causes. And one example of this is a virus known as the deformed wing virus. You can see in the example, the picture, the bee has shortened, misshapen wings, sometimes paralysis, and it just shortens its overall lifespan. A bee without wings is pretty useless. And this impacts the development of at least 20 bee species already. Another thing is pathogens. So one of the most common pathogens that affects native bees is called American foul brood. And this just reduces honeybee larvae to gooey sacs that later harden into scale-like things, and the bees are unable to leave the sac when they harden. And then finally, another thing that bees have to deal with is just fungi. An example of this is chalkbrood, which is just a fungus that kills and dries the larvae of honeybees and wild bees into mummies. So they basically just turn into mummies and then they suffocate. Next slide.
So how bees can be protected? There are issues plaguing bees, and there are bees are very important. So how can we help solve these? Well, the solutions, yes, there are solutions. They are possible. There's a wide range of capability. The barrier to entry to some of these solutions are very low, and just everyday people are able to help bee populations. The biggest, I would say, and most important solutions would be mitigating climate change induced effects. So climate change as a whole is a very broad and difficult problem to tackle. So focusing on the climate change problems that affect bees specifically is a good way to help bee populations. Another would be the analysis of the natural issues in coinciding with man-made issues. So again, climate change is man-made, but the natural issues like pathogens, as mentioned before, or viruses and bacteria and fungi, it's important to analyze those and see why that affects them, especially in the context of other factors. So, and that brings me to my next point, which is understanding the correlation. So, understanding how all of these come together and affect bees specifically. So, the first one would be protecting and restoring pollinator land. As mentioned before, one of the issues that bees face is the loss of pollinator land and just like an overall less amount of flowers. In a study by Turo in Cleveland, Ohio, they planted forbs or just soft stem flowering plants, and an increase in vegetative mass showed a positive correlation with the bee population numbers and biodiversity, which is good for bee populations, of course. This is kind of easy to infer because nectar is a resource, and by providing nectar to bees, it helps prop up their populations. And anybody can help with this. So restoring huge amounts of pollinator land, that's almost exclusive to agencies and organizations. But even then, you can support them as just a regular everyday person or civilian. You can sign petitions or donate to certain agencies and organizations. Or you can, even if you want to, plant these plants yourselves in a small garden, maybe, perhaps. And I have two flowers that, as an example, just as a suggestion, which are the snapdragon flower and coneflower. Both of these are native to North America and beneficial for bee populations. Another would be pesticide research and development. Unfortunately, pesticide research and development is expensive. It is a difficult issue to tackle. There have been strides and there have been improvements in it, but even then, getting pesticides from lethal to non-lethal is still not enough. For example, the non-lethal impact in a study by Frizeria and others, bees that were exposed to a specific pesticide known as sulfoxaflor, I hope I'm saying that right, they suffered issues outside of just dying from the pesticide. Things like being unable to maintain their body temperature or genetic issues such as stunted wings or deformed bodies or disorientation, unable to track where they are or how to get back to the hive. And keep in mind, this was in controlled doses, so it's not guaranteed that they get this amount of pesticide exposure. They could be exposed to more in the wild naturally. There have been workarounds to this issue as well, ways to try and tiptoe or avoid trying to invest in the pesticide research and development. One example would be pollinator land adjacent to agricultural land. This would be just pollinator plants that bees are attracted to, planted next to agricultural farms and stuff that have pesticides sprayed on them. But according to a study by Graham, that was ineffective, and the exposure of bees to pesticides with pollinator land was about the same as if they didn't have any pollinator land next to it. So this brings up the question, can the external factors be targeted? If we can't really like focus on the pesticides, can we focus on the other things such as the external stress factors that add onto the pesticides? Sorry, it's double clicking. And I would say no. And this brings to the third solution that takes into account the last two, which is considering all factors. These are very complex. They have honed over millions of years and evolution. They have a very special, very complex, very intricate system that they use to survive. And many factors, as such, will take into or be put into play when it comes to their survival. For example, parasites, when it comes to colony spacing, so how close the colonies are to each other, as well as their positioning, so how far above the equator or below they are, how far west, how far east, all affected how parasites spread and at what rate and which type of parasites. In addition, as said before in the study by Frisaria, there was another study by Hisia that really looked into the survival of parasites after bees have been exposed to pesticides. Even if the bees didn't die or they weren't, killed outright, their survival to parasites in general were extremely low. They were lowered heavily than if they weren't exposed to parasites or to pesticides. So to reiterate and to summarize, the possible solutions include restoring the pollinator land. So just plant beneficial plants, maybe in mass or maybe just little amount. Any amount helps. Pesticide research and development, I will say again that is quite difficult, but I do think that taking into consideration, which brings into my third point, the of everything involved in in tandem with the pesticides is would be most effective. And to again reiterate and just to summarize the whole and end it off, this is a diagram of colony collapse disorder, which is just bee colonies going out of survival and declining due to a multitude of effects. And the factors that this includes, as you can see, are pesticides, parasites and viruses, everything we talked about, uh, migratory beekeeping, just loss of genetic diversity. Just artificial beekeeping isn't really good. It's not natural, as well as malnutrition. So loss of again pollinator land. Without nectar, bees can't survive. It's their food source. And I would like to mention the one at the top, the electromagnetic radiation, but it's there's not enough information and the studies on it aren't too great. There needs to be more effort and more studies put and more science put into the subject to really determine if that's like something that needs to be considered for bees. Personally, I don't think it's too big of a deal, and the other reasons for colony collapse disorder are way more important to focus on.
Yeah, so that brings us to our conclusion, which is just there needs to be an emphasis on helping native bees since they're on a population decline because of our excessive pesticide use, climate change, and disease. All of these factors have pushed them from their habitats or just shrunk their natural habitats to the point where our food security might be affected. Um, so the alternatives to using these excessive pesticides are crop rotation and biological control. And these can be implemented instead of using the cheap pesticides constantly. Um, so obviously bees can still be protective. We've talked about why they're endangered, and we've talked about what we can do to help them, giving them more natural, giving them their habitats back, natural habitats back, giving them areas in bigger cities. All of these factors can help bees make a comeback. Next slide. So some of you may have noticed different pictures of bees throughout our presentation. All of these are actually currently bees that are considered endangered. So our group decided that we were going to use the Franklin bumblebee, the rusty patched bumblebee, the Hawaiian yellow-faced bees, Gulf Coast solitary bee, the Macropis cuckoo bee, and the sunflower leaf cutting bee. So thank you all so much for listening. And yeah, this is our presentation on the endangered native bees.
And here are our references.